And we are live. Welcome to another episode of Business Focus Live with me, John, where we talk about business related topics as well as news from here and around the world. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe and let's get started. And we're back. Thank you again for joining me today. So today is April 22nd, 2023. There are a lot of interesting things that's been going on this past week or so, than more so than our first topic, which is Taylor Swift. If you're familiar, the singing sensation superstar, who almost got into trouble by partnering with FTX, the debunked FTX, who filed for bankruptcy in the recent scandal with the CEO, who was trying to acquire or partner with Taylor Swift in terms of signing a $100 million sponsorship. But what went awry? We'll take a look at that. Next, we'll also be talking about the financial sector, in particular, one of the biggest investors of all time, best investors of all time. You have Warren Buffett, who's pulling out his positions in the banking sector, in the financial sector, in terms of how terrible the banking institutions have been managing their portfolio. So how much of the position he's left, we'll take a look at that as well. And sticking with mismanagement, I don't know if you call it mismanagement, but companies are, in particular, tech companies have been laying off their employees left and right. And none is even Facebook, formerly known as Facebook, the Meta, has been laying off mass droves of their employees here. So we'll take a look how's that going to affect the company. Is it because of what's going on with the failure that is Meta, or is it just the normal cycle due to the normalcy after the pandemic? Anyway, next we'll be discussing some local news in terms of the push for increase in minimum wage by the government, which I think is misleading, because obviously minimum wage doesn't even begin to help those individuals that are at the bottom level, and obviously increasing it can only be marginal at best in terms of its improvement, because obviously to look at improvement, you have to look at minimum household wage rather than individual, because obviously can you support yourself, let alone support your family. And lastly, we'll be discussing some of the most populous country in the world. And stay tuned for the last part. It's not the country that you're thinking now. It has been supplanted by the next closest to it. So we'll take a look at that and what's the implication for that for the rest of the world and in terms of business as well. So anyway, so let's get started. So as mentioned earlier, Taylor Swift, one of the biggest singing sensation. Not necessarily a big fan, but I like her music nonetheless. Almost had a partnership with FTX, the former FTX, who is debunked now, who has been, in has filed for bankruptcy because of its CEO. Anyway, she almost signed a $100 million agreement with the company. So let's take a look here. So according to BusinessInsider.com, Taylor Swift then signed a $100 million FTX sponsorship because she was the only one to ask about unregistered securities, according to the lawyer. Now, it's not her. Obviously, she's not financially that familiar with FTX. She almost did. Now, luckily for her, her father was familiar, had the background in finance, so he was able to advise her to stay away from the company. And obviously many of the many individuals, known celebrities who had been sponsored by the company, said company, I think Shaquille O'Neal, you have Tom Brady, to name a few. Just goes to show, if company is waiving a lot of large sums of cash, people could be blindsided or blinded by the enormity of the money, and not even consider whether the product is actually sound and believable in this case. So let's take a closer look on the article. So it mentions here that Taylor Swift pulled out, as mentioned, with the sponsorship, and a lawyer suing celebrities for promoting FTX. Now, obviously, that's not just the fault of the celebrities who are promoting it, but also the one who's been pushing it, like a Ponzi scheme, as mentioned, using unregistered securities, which is technically which is considered illegal because you have to register with the, I think it's the Fed. I forgot. Anyway, to name a few, you have Tom Brady, the retired Tom Brady. You have Stephen Curry being sued for endorsing the now bankrupt cryptocurrency, which is never a good thing if you're those individuals. Obviously, the money comes with responsibility, and if things go awry, you'll be blamed for all of this. And according to the lawsuit, the plaintiffs are seeking over the north of 5 billion from FTX celebrity endorsers. Now, I don't know how that's going to pan out because obviously they can only endorse up to a certain point. Now, are they held liable because those individuals who believe in their in their promotion, obviously it's going to tarnish their reputation. That's why you want to be careful in terms of who you believe, not just a pretty face, a known face, and think that everyone is not immune to making mistakes here. And some of the celebrities mentioned, you have Shaquille O'Neal, you have Tom Brady, and even comedian Larry David. And according to the lawyer, alleged that celebrities didn't do their due diligence, which I think is a given because of the money that was showcased to them. Then the one person I found that that did that was Taylor Swift of all people. That's why I found it surprising when I read this article that obviously, luckily for her, her dad, who was in the financial sector, who used to work, as you can see here, her father used to work for Merrill Lynch, so at least he knows what he's talking about and dig deeper into the situation as to what's going on here. And according to the team, they mentioned that no one really liked the deal. Too expensive from the beginning, according to sources. And actually, the team Taylor Swift actually asked them point blank, can you tell me that these are not unregistered securities, which is a very dangerous thing, because obviously securities are tradable assets that holds values here like stocks or bonds, and has to go through the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, not the Fed, federal government. So it mentions here that the company FTX, which is trading cryptocurrencies, which is a very popular alternative form of currency, which is a token that has certain words. Now, obviously, those values has dipped significantly from its popularity way back in the 2020s, at the height of the pandemic, from as high for the Bitcoin value of 60,000 has now dipped around 20,000, a little over 20,000. So using that popularity to using celebrities to promote said products, and the mismanagement of the CEO, obviously, which imploded what happened subsequently, which is should be a stark reminder for all people, individuals, that they should be careful on where they invest their money, who they believe. Obviously, Tom Brady is a former athlete. Sure, you can promote certain aspects, but in terms of this severity, you want to think twice as to, does he know about, does he have investment in FTX? Because if they don't have any investments in the said company, then how can you promote such things, right? Whether you're a product endorser or not in this case. Luckily for Miss Swift here, she left unscathed here. Anyway, so segueing, continuing with our discussion in mismanagement, one of the biggest investors or best investors of all time, you have Mr. Warren Buffett, almost north of 90 years old, close to 100, is pulling his investment in the banking sector in particular. So what necessitates that? Should people be concerned on what's the trajectory for many of the banks that are mismanaging their businesses here? So let's take a closer look. According to BusinessInsider.com, it mentions that Mr. Warren Buffett dumped several banks after spotting red flags in their financials. Here's what spooked him and which stock he sold. And obviously, he mentions this in the past. If you're a astute follower of Mr. Buffett, in terms of he invests on companies not necessarily based on the stock market price, but based on the valuation of companies, actual valuation of the company. So if it's undervalued, he invests on it. If it's overvalued, it stays away from it. And one of his teachings, he mentions that he invests on companies that he does understand and stays away from companies that he does not understand. A good example was Microsoft, which he explains in years past. Anyway, he mentions that the bosses of said banks were acting recklessly and misleading investors and analysts. I think this goes to show, like in the discussion we talked about the SVP, Silicon Valley Bank, which obviously not having enough liquid cash to support your depositors and focusing on long-term investments rather than having a wide diverse portfolio that can supplement their business in the short run as well as in the long run, blew up in their faces, right? And let's take a closer look at some of his decisions, which banks he pulled out. Uh, he mentions that he noticed that several banks were valuing their assets at cost instead of market value. Now, obviously, the concern of this part is if you use it as the basis of your value, then that can be overvalued, which is not the right way of looking at how the company's performance. But obviously, companies are either pressured or misleading investors that the growth is continually growing, but in actuality that's not the case, that's why every investor, everyone who's thinking of investing in companies, whether it's small or big, should really learn how to look at financial statements so that they can learn from themselves that if said company is actually valued at the right amount, or if it's overvalued or undervalued, then you have an opportunity to turn a significant return here. He mentions that they made a fundamental error by mismatching their assets and liabilities. So, for example, they took customer deposits that would be withdrawn immediately and used them to buy long-dated government bonds. So obviously, long-term investments, which would happen to Silicon Valley when depositors wanted to withdraw all of a sudden, which obviously derailed the company's performance. Mr. Buffett also mentions that I don't like it when people get too focused on the earnings number, meaning short-term near earnings rather than long-term performance, and mentions that and forget what in view are basic banking policies, which obviously you make sure that your company is growing at a steady pace, uh, same as the industry standards. And he goes on to mention that he didn't like that banking could get into a lot of trouble just because these kinds of things that they did. And he mentions that he didn't like the banking business as well as I did before. So the 92-year-old mentioned that one of his cornerstone uh, investments, Wells Fargo in particular, when it was hit way back in the late 1980s, 89, and counted as cornerstone of his stock portfolio for many years, but then sold the last year, first quarter of last year. And he mentions that he did sell banks that we'd owned for 20, 30 years. Now, obviously, for the 20, 30 years that he owned, they were doing well, but obviously, If times change, you have to move with the times, and if you need to pull out, then it's better to pull out early rather than later here. And obviously, one of the main problems that the banking sector is dealing with is because governments have been bailing them out. Uh, so you can see here they left stakes in J.P. Morgan. You have Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, M&T and M&T Bank. You have PNC Financials in just the last 3 years alone, which is you know which you can see here. It also slashed uh, BNY Mellon stake by almost 70%, which is a pretty significant. And its U.S. bank stayed by 95%. So, he's putting where his mouth is in terms of his belief of the credibility of the banking sector here. And obviously, he still has positions in other industries like in Apple, and I think in Bank of America, which he has still positions in those two. But for the rest, obviously, he has trepidations and apprehensions in his positioning here. And what's interesting here, his bank portfolio from quarter four of 2019 to compared to just last year has dropped significantly. So if we were to take a closer look, so you can see here on the left chart, it's close to 60 billion. And then for quarter four of 2022, it's been almost down to half, from 65 to roughly 40 billion, less than 40 billion, which is, obviously in terms of his managing of that amount of money is pretty significant, which just goes to show you if he is considering, leaving or, reducing his stake in those companies, that maybe the rest of us should take note as well. Anyway, we'll see how that pans out, what happens next. Next is, poor decision making. Is it what happened there? That's why Mr. Zuckerberg is having mass layoffs in his company in Facebook, formerly known as Facebook, Meta. According to TechCrunch.com, another round of mass layoffs expected at Meta this week. It mentions here that it's expected to issue another round of mass layoff. Several sources working at the company mentions that Meta has confirmed the layoff this week. The number of people that will be laid off is in the range of thousands, so 4,000. And that's in total of the 10,000 layoffs that Mr. Zuckerberg announced in March. Many of which relate to low priority projects. So obviously, they're trying to lower their costs because of their shift focus on the metaverse, which hasn't been panning out too well lately. So obviously, you can cut down costs up to a certain point, but if your investments or endeavors doesn't pan out, that could hurt the company in the long run. Obviously, there's still a $1 billion company that that's still reaping the reward because of its platform in Facebook and Instagrams and whatnot. But the question is, how long will it last the company? It mentions here that they've been focusing, obviously, the metaverse, with connections with the headset VR, the Oculus, which is a whole lot of problems and, hasn't been ideal for the metaverse. And I'm not sold that it's going to be the way of the future here, but could be wrong. They could still turn things around. So we'll see. Going now to some local news, as mentioned, we were mentioning earlier, in terms of wage increase is important, especially with the rise of inflation, has to be adjusted. But the minimum wage is not an indicator of if the economy or if the society is doing well, because minimum is just the minimum. You want to be able to support not just yourself, obviously. Minimum household income should be the main consideration here, but they're getting, I would say, discouraged, but focusing on the wrong things here. So according to philstar.com, it mentions that the Labor Party list pushes wage recovery increase of 150 pesos in workers' daily pay. Now, what's the minimum wage currently? Let's type here. Wage. So the minimum wage right now is somewhere around $500, and they've been pushing for 150, so that's 650. And the question here is, if you did the math, where's my calculator? There you go. So 650 times 30. That's less than 20,000, 19,500. So if you look it like that, less than 20,000, that's gross salary, and if you deduct that, we'll be able to support your family with that. Obviously, you need significantly higher salary to be able to support yourself and your family here. And obviously, with the rise of cost, inflation has severely affected this, obviously not just in the basic commodities, in transportation, fuel, and everything here. So, you know, showing that 150 is sufficient, I think is not sufficient, and pushing for this increase even is even difficult. And as mentioned here, the labor union has filed bill seeking to provide an across-the-board nationwide increase of 150 pesos for daily workers and employees in the private sector. Obviously, the decline in real value of workers caused by surging inflation without waiting for regional wage boards to act on petition for pay increases, which is obviously very detrimental to our citizens in this particular case. And according to Representative Raymond Mendoza, he mentions that since late last year, the TUCP was already calling for wage boards to address the steady decline in the real value of wage to surging inflation. So obviously, the rise of cost has been steadily increasing, and yet the salaries of those employees have remained stagnant, haven't increased appropriately in that aspects. And obviously, that is not enough. Obviously, to be able to support oneself and one family here. And obviously, which goes to show that some of our best people are leaving our country because of this, not just the minimum wage problem, but the abundance of professions that can supplement the needs of any individual and family here in our country. But it's a work in progress. Hopefully, the governments can see to it that they can find ways to improve on it, rather than delay it or think that people are not complaining and rise up again, which we don't want another recurrence of the people's revolution again. It's a revolution sometime in the future. Anyway, for our last topic, we mentioned earlier that the most populous country in the world is not the country that you were thinking already. Talking of China now. So I think we've covered this recently regarding the decline of the population in China due to the control of their birth rate. And obviously, if you let it persist, obviously the issue now on of individuals, families, couples foregoing having kids has long-term effects, which is what's happening, especially for many developed countries, such as in China, you name it, you have Japan, European countries, even in Canada, is significantly affected. And who stands to benefit from this all is the second largest, biggest population is now, has overtaken China now, which is India, the most populous country in the world. And what's the implications for the rest of the world? So according to Tech Times, what does this mean, especially for the tech markets? Obviously, you have big companies such as Apple trying to penetrate the Indian market, but to no avail. Even Tesla is trying to penetrate the Indian market, but that's not always the case. And obviously, the government is protecting their local industries, businesses, by making sure it's difficult for foreign businesses to enter the market here, and which is good for them, which creates a lot of power. And obviously they have to play ball, lower the cost, make it enticing, but we'll see. Anyway, according to the UN's population dashboard, India is now the most populous country by as mid of 2023, with over 1.4 billion. The country's population is slightly larger now than China. And the question is, will China's population decline while India's population incline, and it creates a sort of problems in the long run here. And it mentions here that India also has one of the youngest population, with more than half of its population under 30 and more than two-thirds of its working age between 15 to 64, which is what's ideal here. Obviously, when you look at the shape, you want it to be a pyramid where the tip is at the top rather than opposite, which is at the bottom, because if there are few people at the bottom, more people at the bottom, the society, the economy will collapse, because it's difficult to support the entire nation if it's flipped down upside down. So this is a tremendous opportunity for India, but obviously there are challenges in India's growing market power. Uh, one of the problem is one-third of its country's youth is unemployed, undereducated, and unemployed. So even though they have more people, but are they capable individuals is another case. So obviously for the government to improve education, the infrastructures, and the whole lot, in terms of development of your country here. And it mentions that only 5% of the Indian workforce is formally skilled. So obviously for the 1.4 billion, 5% is not the entirety, which is a very small person, just a few hundred million only. So how do you translate that to the entire rest of the population is a daunting task. So transitioning to an industrial economy, the problem will be on the shoulders of current Prime Minister Narendra Modi, which is pushing to increase manufacturing share from 14% to 25%. And pushing for increased manufacturing, obviously for tech companies like Apple mentioned, but they're having difficulty penetrating it. Uh, that's why they're trying to build manufacturing to employ people, to create new jobs so that they can sell their products in their country. You also have electric vehicle market, the EVs, but how popular is it going to be? Because you have Tata, which is the homegrown big brand in India, is going to compete with other known companies such as Tesla, Volvo, and Rivian companies here. And obviously, those who are first to the market tends to control the market here. And you also have the chip market, the US India initiative, the emerging technologies, I set for the joint quantum computing and defense efforts. Obviously, the US is looking for partners to deviate, to circumvent China's power control in the global marketplace. But obviously, time will tell, because there are a lot of complexities attached to it. With the current war that's happening in the northern part of Asia with Russia and Ukraine, the instability with the relationship between China and the US, and the whole lot, and the pandemic is still present, and the supply chain, all of those things play into all of those things, and we'll see how things pan out. But obviously for India, it's looking up and up for them, but obviously there are still problems that needs to be rectified to be able to capitalize on their positioning in the marketplace. Anyway, I think that's about it for today. Let's see if we have any messages here. Yes, message here is there's an issue with nursing manpower in our country as most go abroad. Yeah, as mentioned earlier, some of our best and brightest individuals, smart, obviously, people who have the necessary training, and obviously other countries who pay for their services don't have to train them. So technically they shortcut the process by just hiring them, since they have the basic knowledge, hopefully some experience, and they tend to benefit from it, and they get paid, obviously a substantial amount. Obviously our our currency compared to other nations is abysmal here, let alone if we compare our Philippine peso to the US, is 60 per dollars, something to that effect. And obviously it's going to entice anyone here, even I, if someone to offer me a significant pay raise, then I would seriously consider grabbing that opportunity here. But obviously it comes with a lot of problems if you're going to uproot yourself, let alone your family. Obviously, starting all over again, adjusting, dealing with discrimination, dealing with a whole lot that sometimes we take it for granted here in our country because obviously we can boast that we have some of the most hospitable countries in the world, because if people come to our nation, they always say glowing remarks in terms of how people is. I'm not saying that the infrastructure is there, but in terms of people wise, but in other countries they may have the infrastructure, but in terms of people, could be a hit and miss. It's not a perfect world, but it is what it is. And it's not just the healthcare sector, but in IT and other professions, engineers, highly specialized. I think we've discussed air traffic controllers that happened earlier this year when there was a disruption. They were, I think, in the Middle East. I forgot which country. I think it's UAE, who pirated some of our best air traffic controllers because of a significant pay grade from tens of less than 100K to a pay raise of almost $500,000, half a million pesos. So obviously that would convince any individual to grab that opportunity, and have better salary, better situation, better opportunity, and better equipments. And we're always lagging behind, and it's not just in the sectors, but in a whole lot that needs improvement. And that is just for the infrastructure that we need. Obviously, you need more capable people. Education is another, and there's heap lot of problem that needs to be addressed before we can even try to compete. And don't get me started with the bureaucracy of the graft and corruption that's happening. That's why it's slowing or limiting us to reaching our full potential. Anyway, that's about it today. So if you find our discussions here interesting or entertaining, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. Continue supporting the channel. So we're trying to get to our next tier here. So thank you for supporting. We've reached our 1,000 mark. So we're now trying to get to 4,000 to 10,000 subscribers, hopefully in the near future here. Anyway, come back again hopefully on Saturday afternoons. We'll continue our discussions with Business Focus Live. Also, you can check out my other contents. Mondays, every other Mondays for Monday Checklist, and then every Wednesdays for Business Update. As always, I'll see you in the next one. Take care.